All right, this is citizenship and immigration attorney Parviz Malakouti. Welcome to our 38th mobility space. Today we're talking about our most useful and favorite travel gear. So just as a reminder, this is space number 38 of 50 mobility spaces that we're doing this year on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, sovereignty, and of course, passports. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. In these spaces, we're usually talking about the law. So, developments in law, trends related to citizenship, residency, visa, that sort of thing. Today we're going to talk about travel gear. It's a little bit lighter than what we usually talk about. I thought I'd just take the opportunity to see what other people are using, what they think is their most useful travel gear. I hope to learn actually about travel gear that I'm not aware of, or maybe I'm aware of but didn't know how useful it is. And then of course just share what I think are some of my favorite types of travel gear. So um, anybody, just as a reminder, anybody who wants to speak is welcome to do so. Just send me a request and I will approve it right away. I'll go first, okay? Basically, talking about what my favorite pieces of travel gear are. And so, the first thing that comes to my mind automatically is the Samsonite soft side spinner. This is like my goat, my greatest of all time piece of travel gear. I've used this for years and years. It fits as a carry-on. It's good for all of my short trips and even sometimes for my longer trips. I've taken international trips, lengthy ones, using just this and a computer laptop bag. So this is probably my hands down favorite piece of travel gear. There's a million variations of the Samsonite soft side spinner. I like the classic black, even though it's more difficult to pick out, right? If you're in a sea of luggage, but I would list that as my first most useful piece of travel gear, and it's pretty rare that I take a flight without one, and even some of my longer or most of my road trips, I'm bringing this Samsonite as well with me. So that's number one. Number two, Faraday bags. So I started using Faraday bags earlier this year to protect electronics while traveling through travel hubs, so airports, train stations, that sort of thing. So, for those who aren't familiar, what a Faraday bag does is it basically blocks signals to your electronic devices so that so that it can't be attacked from the outside. So, laptops, cell phones, any type of electronic device, you can put it into a Faraday bag. They're usually just black bags. They have kind of a bizarre texture to them. And when you close the bag, if the Faraday bag is working correctly, no outside electronic signal should be able to get through to that. So that's one thing that I started implementing as became kind of more aware and sensitive to attacks on electronic devices. As obviously we start getting more and more connected, I guess, with one another. Hand in hand with the Faraday bag, I have an RFID blocker that I keep in my wallet. It's the size of a credit card. It goes in next to the credit cards and driver's license, whatever else you have, and it creates basically a protective field within, I think, half of an inch roughly. So for those cards that have chips in them, right? So same thing, blocking signals from the outside. I started implementing that, I think, last year, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm happy. I test the Faraday bags. The way I test the Faraday bags, and I'd be happy to hear from other people too if they use them, is so I'll throw, for example, my cell phone in the Faraday bag if I have a new one, and I'll send a text message to the cell phone from the laptop, and I'll have basically the audio on. And basically the way I test it is to make sure that I don't hear anything, from the cell phone. And then I'll take the cell phone out, and then typically I'll hear just a succession of pings, pings, pings of the text messages that I sent, finally arriving to the cell phone once the phone is outside of the Faraday bag. So that's how I test the efficacy of the Faraday bag, and I do a similar process, reverse process, for laptops and other types of devices. Um, Annalisa Fernandez, I see you're here. I'm going to invite you to speak. You're welcome to come in here as well. After I'll just say one more item that I use, and then I'd love to hear from you. And I think you might be a travel gear junkie, according to what you said before. So I just sent you a request to speak. So Faraday bags with the RFID blocker that go into the wallet would be my second one. So I guess second piece of travel gear that I love, that I would recommend to people. And then thirdly, a power bank. So a remote power bank. Our cell phones are our life. We run our whole lives through our cell phones, especially while traveling, right? So having your phone run out of battery when you're, on a phone, or excuse me, on an airplane or at an airport or out and about, is just obviously not acceptable nowadays. It can really throw a monkey wrench in your travel. So the third item I basically keep with me always when I'm traveling is a power bank, a small power bank. So those would be my three top pieces of travel gear that I feel like I rely on the most, that I like the most, I would recommend to other people. Um, Annalisa, can I throw out the same question to you? What are your favorite pieces of travel gear? And it could be, whatever you like, whether it's just old, tried and true, rugged, or if it's kind of newfangled tech, share with us what you use and rely on to travel around.
Sorry about that. So, listening to you, I think that, well, I guess travel, like anything else, it reflects what you're most worried or concerned about, right? So you seem to be worried about like surveillance, your cybersecurity, high tech, and I'm like focused on survival. So all my travel gear is like, how do I survive if like there's an apocalypse? So I'm like always traveling with, which is what I was so curious about this space. Anyway, so I travel with like a little mini smoke detector, a little mini carbon monoxide detector. I have a second phone in case, I always have my old phone with me that I could use as a Wi-Fi device or buy a SIM card. And I have like plastified copies of all of my identity documents so that I can leave them in the safe or at home or whatever. And oh, what else? Let me go to my list. Oh, and protein. I'm like always worried that I'm going to be, especially since I'm a mom, I'm always worried that I'm going to be one of those planes that's sitting on the tarmac for 8 hours and they don't give you any food. So every single bag of peanuts that I get on an airplane, I don't consume. I just throw them into the bottom of my travel bag for the day that starvation comes.
Those are great items. That's, survival, obviously, in the order of priorities, survival is first, right? Even above privacy. To that note, I bought a portable door lock that I've not used yet. I bought it like a year ago. I still have not tried it yet. But it's one of the things that basically you're supposed to be able to put on the hotel door, and it provides an extra level of protection if the door lock fails as well. Have you ever tried something like that? Do you have
I bought one too, and I have never used it. But I mean, I think that that's awesome because honestly, especially now that everything's electronic, you just never know. I mean, you go to like the Hilton, I can check in on my Hilton app, and I go to my door and buzz open my door, and you're thinking, I mean, that's just like ripe for interference, right? So I love that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've not done heavy research on it, but from the little research I did on the products that were in the market, I didn't see like one clear cut go to that everybody says like, oh, this is the great door lock. So that's something that's high on my priorities relatively to check out, to test and have a reliable one to use. And then I would say hand in hand with that, I've not bought one yet, but I do want to buy a little camera that plugs into a power plug to plug into the hotel room when I'm gone, just to see obviously if make sure nobody's stealing the stuff or poking around there or sneaking around, things like that. Have you ever experimented with that, like a camera for the room?
I thought about that one too, and I bought this little cheapo Temu one, and then it was just such a pain that I never did it. But then I'm thinking, I have all of these little Roku and Blink cameras at home, and I could just pop one into my bag, and that would be kind of fun to have. Sometimes I even think about bringing my Google Home device with me on vacation and plugging it in because my whole life is like me talking to my 30 Google Home devices in my house. So that's something else that I would like to just pop in my bag if I had space. But then again, got to make priorities, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, as far as cloth-based items, I've wondered if there's something on the market that combines like like a scarf, but that can be wrapped up into a pillow, or something that can be used for like comfort. I've been kind of looking for something like I don't want to have 4 or 5 different cloth items. If I could have like one or two, and so I've been currently searching to see if something like that is around. I haven't found like a solid one. Do you just bring a regular different cloth item for everything you need, or do you, how do you handle pillows, scarves, bandanas, that type of thing? Do you just have one of each?
Well, yeah, another kind of travel gear for that cloth that I like to bring is my own pillowcase. If I'm not going to be staying in really nice hotels, then I figure like, well, at least I can bring my 800 thread count pillowcase with me and slip it on over a pillow. So I tend to travel with a lot of cloth and a lot of clothes too. But yeah, women can use, men too, can use scarves very strategically. And then that reminds me of something else I bring, depending on where or when. If it's like a cruise, I always bring my own clothesline. And especially if I want to travel light in the summer, they make these little travel clotheslines that are so cool. They have like the clips on them, and then you can string them across your balcony. And it's just so much fun to hang out your clothes outside in a Mediterranean summer.
Interesting. I've only been on two cruises in my life. I don't think I've ever done laundry on the cruises, so that didn't even occur to me as a need. Oh, so it sounds like you're a big cruiser, huh?
No, I have a cruise client, so I did a lot of cruise speaking for a while, and I do. When my kids were younger, I did. I think cruises get a totally bad rap. There are all kinds of cruises. There are bad ones. There are good ones, just like anything else. But that clothesline thing, I mean, I bring it just to hotels too, like a hotel balcony. I love like stringing my clothes out across the balcony and I just try to get gauze fabric that dries literally. Like if you're in Spain, something will dry in like 20 minutes, I swear.
Yeah, cord. It's funny you mentioned survival at the beginning of the call. Cord is like one of the most utilitarian items for even hardcore survival, like out in the wilderness and stuff. If you ever watch like prepper channels or even camping channels, they're always recommending to have solid cord. Paracord, it tends to be like one of the go-tos. And yeah, I guess in a lighter application like cruise lines, they could be used as a clothing line as well.
Oh my God, do you mean like use my clothesline as a tourniquet? Is that what you're saying?
I wasn't thinking exactly about tourniquet, but I mean, but yeah, if you have, if you have somebody bleeding and there's no tourniquet, a cord is better than nothing, I think.
I guess.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's funny you brought up tourniquets. Actually, currently I don't travel with tourniquets. If I'm going, for example, like a flight, I don't. But I do keep tourniquets actually in my car, and I have a bag like an EDC everyday carry bag, even though I don't actually always leave the car with it. And I have a tourniquet in that as well too. And I've been playing with the idea of putting the tourniquet in my travel luggage as well, like making that one of the items because if you look at like case studies and statistics and stuff, people bleeding out before they get to a hospital is one of the biggest causes of death in like for traumatic injury accidents. And a tourniquet is crude of a tool that as it may be, that's something that stops the bleeding at least from extremities. So I'm thinking, you know what? I've been leaning towards putting the tourniquet in, and I think after this call, I'm probably gonna add that actually to to
Now
to
you're
my
giving me too
Samsonite.
many ideas. I didn't need to bring along with my smoke detector and my carbon monoxide monitor a tourniquet, but okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're not that bulky. They're not heavy. It's usually you know, like maybe like they can be crushed down to about two, let's say two iPhones back to back, like that volume, and of course much lighter than that. But of course you got to know how to use it, of course, as well too, right? I mean, so the training obviously, first YouTube videos, but you can obviously go to a class for that as well too. Yeah, I think I'm gonna add it. I'm making the decision as we're talking right now. I think I'm gonna be adding tourniquets to the travel gear as well. Here's a question for you, Annalisa. What do you think is? Do you have a travel gear item that you use that you think is really useful that very few people that you know also travel with?
I think all these things, like people don't even travel with a second phone, which I find so weird. Like if you lose your phone, you are screwed. Like you can't get money, you can't check your hotel reservations, you can't do anything. So I always think it's really weird that people don't travel with a backup phone. Um, so I think everything that I travel with is just like kind of weird, like the smoke detectors and the clotheslines and the um medications and all that. But like I said, I'm like weirdly in survival mode. I mean, you were talking about the medical kit. Like, I remember the old days of Latin America. I mean, like 20, 30 years ago. Um, you would have to, they would recommend traveling with syringes because you couldn't count on getting clean needles. So depending, where in the world you're traveling, things like that. I don't do that anymore. But yeah, I can't
20,
think of anything really weird that I travel with. It just except like just that everything, because I guess I'm just a travel prepper.
20, 30 years ago, there was recommendations to travel with syringes to Latin America.
There was in case you needed like injections for anything, and they would say because they were reusing needles. I mean, oh my God, don't quote
Wow.
me on this, but I
Okay.
remember that being kind of one of the warnings, so I followed it.
Interesting, interesting. On the phone point, so I've done both. I admit my default is to travel with only one phone, a phone and a laptop. But you raise a great point. Obviously, like if you rely on your phone for everything, which I think probably most people do, at least those, let's say under 40, 45, and you lose the phone, you're going to be up a creek. One of the things, so one experience I had that kind of nudged me away from traveling with two phones is I remember years back I went to Mexico and I had two phones and one laptop or two phones and two laptops. And I think that was because at the time I was segregating my work like kind of very separately to one of the laptops. And I remember I got hit with like some sort of like import charge for having more than two electronic devices. And as they defined electronic device was a cell phone or a laptop. And I think that's what kind of stopped me from defaulting to traveling to two phones. But I'll give you another reason to travel with two phones that was from my own experience. When I went through Latin America in 2017, a bunch of countries, including Venezuela, and at the time Venezuela was infamous for armed robbery. It was like at one of it was like the height of like danger in Venezuela, especially Caracas and big cities. And so, what a lot of people there would do was have their street phone and then their smartphone. Okay, so they if they're going to walk in the street, they wouldn't take their smartphone. They'd have or they'd have like maybe a very very dumbed down smartphone, right? One that's just cheap that they could afford to be robbed of and lose. And then they'd have like their iPhone basically only for the home or if they're traveling somewhere in a car. And so for that trip, I took another phone. I remember it was a blue phone. It was blue as the brand. $11 off of Amazon, and I bought a SIM card from in Caracas, 25-cent SIM card that would last me for a year if needed. I was only there for 14 days, but that was at the height of the inflationary crisis, and I used that phone basically for getting around, outside of a car. But nowadays, for reliance on just being able to access your information to travel, yeah, maybe maybe two phones is kind of a must nowadays.
Yeah, I did that too. It makes me think when I lived in Brazil, I had what everybody would do then is have a second handbag as you were driving because you would get held up in your car. And I actually did once. And then you just hand over your purse. And so you'd have some money and some expired credit cards in there to make it look legit. And then your real purse would be kind of under the seat. But so that
Wow.
was a common strategy. And yeah, I did have to use it. Actually, no, the one time I used it, the one time I did get held up, I was coming back from a trip and I only had my wallet. So I had to hand over my wallet, and that really
Oh,
sucked.
geez, they caught you lacking, as the kids say nowadays.
Exactly. I didn't have that second handbag. You got to be consistent. I didn't have it with me. But yeah, the second phone thing, I think I've actually been thinking about doing that just for real life, anyways, because I just got the Pixel 10 and it is huge. I guess I didn't check that. It's huge and it's heavy. And so I had been deciding between that and the Galaxy Flip. Sorry, I'm an Android user. And so now I just decided I'm going to get both. I'm going to get a little used flip phone and I'm going to carry that everywhere and leave my huge Pixel 10 at home.
Annalisa, on the space that we had regarding the U.S. passport card being accessible on iPhones and some other smartphones, we had a lot of discussion. I think you were there for part of that space, but I
Yeah.
and others had a lot of discussion about this question uh, of using your electronic boarding pass on the phone versus printing it out. And we've spoken about that in other spaces as well here, which I don't think you've been present for. It seems so. The way I do it, and a lot of other people, I'm not gonna say everybody, but a lot of other people do it is to print out the items so that you don't have to have your actual phone out while you're going through TSA or, for example, boarding the plane. Are you an electronic boarding pass person, or are you more of are you do you print out the item?
I'm an electronic everything person. Like I do
Electronic everything.
not print. So yeah, it's all on my phone. And I actually want my ID to be on my phone. So I have my ID in my phone as in the wallet. But my airport's JFK and I try every time and they're like, no, we don't have that system. So I still can't. I still haven't been able to use my digital wallet ID, even though I try.
Interesting. So for you, so I presume for you, any potential concerns about privacy are outweighed by what you think is the gain in convenience. Is that basically the rationale?
Well, in other areas, I'm super careful about that, but I don't know if it being on my phone is really going to be any different. I mean, the email is there with the boarding pass on my phone. So,
Right. Right.
and like Gemini is now summarizing all my emails. So everything's just there,
Right.
whether I want it to be or not.
Right, right. Yeah, that I mean on the phone, yes, but I mean as far as like remote access of of the phone from the outside, if your phone's in a Faraday bag while you're going through TSA and you're just presenting a paper boarding pass, yeah, the phone still has the info, but other like third party malicious attackers, right? Ostensibly, hopefully, would have more difficulty getting towards that information versus if the phone is on and the electronic boarding pass is being presented. That's at
Yeah,
least the argument.
yeah, I'm totally not good at that because my phone is always in my hand. So I'm not going to
Gotcha.
pass that test.
Yeah, I mean it's fun. So I'm 41, so I remember a time when there were not cell phones. I went through high school without cell phones. I got my first cell phone when I was a freshman in college, and even having lived almost half my life without a cell phone, I'm like shocked by how strong the instinct is to, like you said, always have the phone in the hand. I mean, to the point where sometimes it feels like if the phone is out of my hand, if I'm awake and the phone is out of my hand for 10 minutes and I'm not doing like an activity like running, it feels like an overwhelming urge to grab it and just have it. And so I've been trying to like fight back against that actually a little bit and wean myself sounds like an addict, but wean myself off of it for longer and longer periods of time, to make sure that I don't you know become an easy target, I guess, to people trying to get information on the phone.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is, like I said, this is a little bit of a different mobility space. We typically talk about kind of heavier topics, visas and residency, citizenship. Um, I don't know where else to go with this. I thought more people were going to be on the space sharing their travel gear. Any other? I might end this space early, rather than just than talk on my own. But do you have any other travel tips, travel hacks, even if it's not gear related, that you'd like to share to anybody listening or to me?
Travel hacks. I mean, I think like if I fly most of the time I fly economy and I think like if you're flying business or first, you don't even need any travel hacks in the cabin, right? But in the back of the plane where you need them, yeah, I've got all kinds of stuff. I have this little thing that goes in the windowsill to hold your drink. I have like the foot hammock. I have just I like it in my seat and I'm setting up my whole environment. I guess pretending like I'm in business class in the back of the bus. But those things really help, I think. I mean, I spend a lot of time on planes, so I like to customize my environment.
Do you have? I mean, do you have like brands a brand for the foot hammock that you've settled on that you think is really good?
No, I have this a good neck pillow that's like it's a brand like Cabeau or something that I bought in France, and that thing is amazing as a neck pillow. I've never seen them in the US. Um, but no, the rest of the stuff is just besides that fancy neck pillow, the rest of my stuff is just little Amazon and Temu stuff.
Okay, okay. So, Annalisa, I'm looking at your profile. It says tech, culture, and language in UX, LLMs, privacy, and social media. What do you do that has you traveling? Like, what are you typically traveling to or from?
I advise companies on international expansion and the cultural dynamics of digital communication and just digital presence overall. So I'm just constantly traveling, whether to I wish I had more clients abroad and that would give me more excuse to travel, but it's conferences abroad. And then I also just live between two countries. I live between US and Spain. So it's part of it's just my life.
Oh, very nice. Okay, U.S. and Spain. So you're one of these. Well, I mean, Americans have been living, a foot in one country to some extent for a while, but I think that this
Have
has
they?
really exploded in the last couple of years, especially since the beginning of COVID really pushed much more work online, especially white collar work. I'm a lawyer. Before March 2020, I was doing the majority of my work still online, but COVID really pushed the few vestiges of in-person things online as well, or electronic for I know for me and for many other lawyers and white collar professionals. Did you see a or did you realize a change in your ability to kind of be remote after COVID, or were you kind of already doing your by country thing before that?
Not as much. I mean, the Spain, the one foot in each country is kind of new. We went in COVID when we could, working remotely, and so we pulled my daughter out of school in the U.S. and my husband and I could work remote, so we just moved ourselves to Spain, and we would have liked to have stayed, but honestly, it became a little more difficult than we thought to stay forever. So now just back and forth because I think everything still hasn't caught up, whether it's banking, citizenship rules, tax rules. It can get very complicated, especially, I think the older you get, the more assets you have, the more presence you have in different places. It can be very hard to manage a life in two countries. So have to be a tax resident of the US is basically what I'm saying.
Of course, of course. And if you're not already familiar, make sure you follow and check out John Richardson's stuff. He has tons and tons of content on Americans living abroad and specifically the tax issues that they deal with. His John Richardson's handle is I think it's citizenship taxation or something like that. But he's got great content. Do you perceive, Annalisa, having a foot in both countries, that you're more free, or is it more just that it's an improvement on your lifestyle?
I mean, it's both. Yeah, I think it definitely. I always say that I think these days it used to be about, two generations ago it was like a condo in Florida, and then maybe it was like a timeshare somewhere in Mexico, and now it's about another passport. So I think it's total freedom. Um, I look at it like that. It's really just setting the ground for the future when I can be more nomadic. And then
Mhm.
it's also just a great lifestyle too. I mean, I love Europe. I was raised part time in Europe too, so it goes way back in my life. But it's just to me, I would rather have that than some place on the beach in Florida or something as a getaway.
Well,
So
Spain has a
and
few beaches or so, I heard too.
that's true. I mean, I'm in Madrid, so I like that city, Euro urban lifestyle, and it's just so easy to get between Madrid and New York. It's just so easy. I mean, it's like a 6 hour flight, and it's like going to LA for me. So it's very manageable.
Right. And what made you choose Spain?
I mean, I guess what it is, strangely enough, is that most of my working life was spent in Latin America. And just as an expat for years between Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Mexico. And I always thought I'd retire in Brazil, and we have a house there. And then Latin America, just for my taste on risk, just got a little bit too difficult. I know there's plenty of passport bros out there going to Latin America and living it up, but my house in Brazil just started getting a little hard to manage from a security perspective. So ended up just going to we speak in my family Spanish and Portuguese, so I ended up spending a lot of time in Spain and Portugal, and just decided that eventually we will live there.
No, that's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, the passport bro phenomenon is is an interesting thing. I don't think passport bros are new per se. I think kind of categorizing them and knowing about them is kind of the new thing, right? But there's been guys, I mean, traveling to Latin America, Asia, Europe, for a while. It's become easier now because of the rise in remote work. I tend to think that from the freedom perspective. So you see a lot of passport bros on YouTube, Twitter, and they're talking about how great wherever they are is. And obviously they're highlighting the benefits, a lot of benefits, perceived benefits of those places. I tend to think that the freedom is not actually in those places. It's that the freedom that they're experiencing is being able to toggle between places. So, if, for example, if it's an American, it's the ability to come and go between the United States and Mexico and Brazil or wherever. It's the in between that's more than the actual being in that foreign place, right? That's what I think. But I think sometimes it gets kind of conflated as, oh, the freedom is in that other place. Do you? I mean, do you think you'd like Spain as much for living if you didn't also have the United States, if it was just full time in Spain? Or do you think it's more of the toggle that actually provides the comfort and the freedom?
Well, I think I'm probably just addicted to the toggle, like probably all of your listeners. I've just moved my entire life every 3 to 4 years. So yeah, I do like that flexibility of going back and forth. And then just, it's a huge world now, and there's just so many kind of little lifestyle arbitrages that if you have a few residences you can do, right? Like I do a lot of my medical in Spain, but I also do it in the US, and I buy all my clothes in Spain. So just little things like that. It's just you can pick, you can have the best of both worlds if you have two countries of residence.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, so it sounds like you're American. I'm also, at least in
Yes.
part, I'm also
Yes.
American. The issue with Americans, right? Obviously, you touched on before is the citizenship-based taxation. Americans can still toggle residency wise, obviously, but there's less to be gained by trying to change a tax residency for an American if they don't want to renounce or otherwise relinquish citizenship, U.S. citizenship. For me, from the people that I talk to, whether it be in consults or in spaces or with John Richardson, the biggest fear in potentially renouncing U.S. citizenship is a fear of inability to come back to even visit the country, right? And that's for a couple of reasons. One is because we have this thing called the Reed Amendment. I don't know if you're familiar with Annalisa, but there's a
No.
there's a section of so the Immigration and Nationality Act controls basically under what conditions what we call aliens, meaning non-U.S. citizens, can come to visit the United States or to be issued visas. And there's a section on what's called inadmissibility. And what this section does is it lists all the conditions under which somebody would not be allowed to come to the United States or to be issued a visa to come to the United States. So, for example, there's criteria for security-related grounds, previous convictions, previous immigration violations. And there's a section that was added per the Reed Act, okay, Reed Amendment, which I think was 1996, that makes it a ground of inadmissibility for U.S. citizen renunciants who have renounced U.S. citizenship for the purposes of avoiding taxation. It makes that a ground of inadmissibility. And so that's a fear, right? Now, in practice, right, we have very little evidence of actually seeing this having been, applied, but it's a law on the books, right? And so there's a fear out there of people who are, let's call them renunciation curious, okay, that they might renounce and then not be able to come back to the United States because of the Reed Amendment, or not because of the Reed Amendment, just because they could be denied a visa for any of the regular reasons that other non-U.S. citizens are denied a visa. So, for example, immigrant intent. If you want a tourist visa to enter the United States, U.S. immigration law says you must have non-immigrant intent. It means you must prove that you are not coming because you want to stay in the U.S., that you only want to
Mhm.
visit the U.S. Furthermore, we have a provision in U.S. immigration law that presumes non-immigrant intent. So what they do is say, we presume you have non-immigrant intent, and you have to prove otherwise. So it shifts the burden of proof to them, and people are denied visas on this basis. And so that's a fear, right, for a lot of U.S. citizens who are considering or thinking about renouncing U.S. citizenship. In my opinion, it's the biggest the biggest fear, the biggest thing that stops people who live their lives mostly. And I'm not speaking necessarily to you. You go back and forth, obviously, but for those American citizens who live primarily outside the United States, from what I've seen, the biggest thing that you know gives them pause or stops them from renouncing is the fear of inability to return to the United States.
Oh, I
Um,
think you
but
probably see more of that because they're your clients, but from what I see and all the, expats that I know in Spain, I've never heard of anybody wanting to relinquish US citizenship. I mean, I think, in my sector, we're not like 23-year-old passport bros. We have kids and responsibilities in the US, so we're not, no one that I've ever met is thinking of giving up their citizenship. But what I do see is there's kind of a range on the tax residency issue. So at the lower income, people are very happy to become tax residents of Spain because, they say, well, I'm paying a little bit more in taxes, but I'm getting so much more, which is true. And medical care is so much less expensive and cost of living is so much less expensive. So they're perfectly happy to take on tax residency in Spain and pay the higher tax. They're usually not going back and forth so much because, again, we're talking about the lower income. And then at the higher income end of the spectrum, you see people trying to avoid the tax residency in Spain because things like medical and food are a much smaller percentage of their total income or expenses. And so they're, looking at it as kind of a second or third home and someplace that they enjoy and love and would love to stay longer, but with, a diverse asset portfolio and IRAs and investment properties, it just becomes prohibitively costly to take on tax residency in Spain.
yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head, Annalisa. The quote unquote poorer the person, which usually means younger person, the more of a deal, the more of a benefit it is for them to spend sufficient physical presence in a foreign country, even if it incurs tax residency, especially to work towards citizenship, right? Because what they're giving up in becoming a tax resident of that country is marginal or sometimes nothing at all. But that physical presence there, 7, 8, 9, 10 months per year, could put them on the path to naturalization eligibility. So in Spain, for example, if somebody's a Mexican citizen or as you probably know, a citizen of other Ibero-American countries, so former colonies of Spain, they have generally a shorter path to naturalization eligibility in Spain, right? It cuts down to 2. If you're 22 years old or 23 years old and you earn $20,000 or 20,000 euros per year, it's much more palatable, and you have very few assets or little, or no assets. It's much more palatable to become a tax resident of Spain, okay, to fulfill the physical presence to work towards that naturalization eligibility versus if you're 33 or 35 or 40 and at the height of your earning capacity, right, and with other assets. So yeah, I do think that the willingness to play the citizenship hopscotch game, right, is much more of a thing among like the younger crowd, right, like under 30, especially under 25, right. And then those of us who are older, right, we come from a time where there's maybe a little bit more emotional attachment wrapped up in one citizenship, right? Less willingness to relinquish a citizenship, even if it's going to save you a lot of money because of a feeling of identity, right?
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
yeah, it seems like the younger passport bros and gals, right, are just a little bit more willing, I think, to do that hopscotch,
Right. Yeah.
and give up the citizenship.
Yeah. That's well said.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay, so we're 37 minutes in. It's 11:41 Pacific Standard where I'm at. Um, you know what? It's been a good conversation, but I think we might just, and usually we do these for an hour as the default. Sometimes we extend longer if we really have a bumping conversation going. But I think we went over some fun points here. I got some travel gear tips from you. For anybody who listens to this after the fact, I also, of course, gave at the beginning what I think are my favorite pieces of travel gear. I think I'm just going to wrap this one up. This was a fun experiment. We did a little bit of a lighter topic here. We'll wrap this one up next, and excuse me, and then we'll do our next mobility space on Thursday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, as usual. And I think we'll go back to more of our regular programming. Talking maybe a little bit more about the heavy stuff. But it was a great conversation. Thank you, Annalisa, for coming and for sharing your experiences. I always love to also hear from travelers that have been traveling for 20, 30, 40 years about what you said, like traveling with syringes and kind of like what were the trends, right? Like traveling 30 years ago. That's always really interesting for me to hear about because it gives insight, right, to travel history.
Exactly. Yeah. The gear is all about what is relevant at the time and to you. So that makes sense. Like for me, it's survival.
Exactly, exactly. And I read passports. I read old passports in the same vein. I love reading old passports because it gives an insight to movement control, visa issuance, and basically the history of freedom of movement, right? And so I tweet about that sometimes. I'll take an old passport and I'll analyze the stamps, the issuance, give some historical context to what was going on at the time, and then compare it to modernly what the equivalent of these things would be, whether it be a visa stamp or an issuance date, issuance period, that type of stuff. And so what you provided is kind of like, to me, the more cultural equivalent of that thing. Okay, great. Thank you, Annalisa. Thanks for everybody else who listened. We do get anonymous listeners as well. I can tell because I look at the numbers after the fact. And make sure you stay tuned for a poll. I'm going to put up a poll with 4 options for the topic of our next mobility space. That'll be mobility space number 39. Make sure you keep an eye out for the poll. Vote on that. And of course, we'd love for you to join on our next mobility space, including you, of course, Annalisa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.